Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Leadership Strategies to Drive Organizational Change. My name is Teri Takai, and I'm a Senior Vice President for the Center for Digital Government. And I am so excited for today's discussion. You are gonna love it. I have two fantastic speakers and a really important topic that we're all challenged with today. So thanks so much for joining us. We're going to have a really great session over the next 30 minutes. Now, I know you guys are all used to being in the box, but a few housekeeping notes for you. First of all, you will get a recording of this presentation. We encourage you to use it for yourselves, but also to share it with your peers and give them the opportunity to really take advantage of the discussion today. You'll be able to connect with your peers that are listening in. For those of you on Twitter, please use hashtag GovTechLive to share key takeaways and quotes and learnings from today's discussion. All right, well, I have these two fantastic people that are here with me for today's discussion. I have Liana Bailey-Crimmins, and she is the California State CIO and the Director for the California Department of Technology. And also my good friend David Morris, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Hyper Solutions. Now we have the speaker bios that are in the speaker bio widget, so I won't go through and read those to you. I think you both know both of these individuals, and we want to have lots of time for conversation. All right, so let's get started. Now we certainly know that in today's environment, all governments are really focused on technology in a way that they haven't been before. And they're looking at things like their digital transformation, modernization, how they're looking at their technical debt. And all of that means that they are looking also at how to improve the overall workflow as they're redesigning technology. But the challenge is we also know that many technology projects fail. Not because the technology doesn't work, but we haven't really thought through the organizational changes. And we see that there's resistance as we bring in new technologies again, because individuals are worried about how's that going to change their jobs. But clearly, with the right leadership structure and strategies, these state and local government transformations can happen. And they bring tremendous success, not only from the standpoint of the technology, but in terms of the way the business is run. So we really want to explore that today, hear about what are some best practices, what are some of the challenges that governments have faced, and how have others faced those. Well, Liana, you have had such a fantastic career in California state government. And so I'm so excited to be able to have this conversation with you. But maybe you could start out by telling us a bit about, in your role as CIO in California, what are some of the things you're focused on in terms of modernizing your technology, bringing in innovation, but also a particular talent that you brought to the state, which is bringing your shareholders along with you?
Well, thank you, Teri, for that amazing question, because California embraces innovation and opportunity through a growth mindset. And I did start my career at 18 and have been able to work my way up through the ranks over the last 30 plus years. And we get to solve the most difficult challenges through an innovative lens. And this 2 years ago, California administration and the legislature actually passed 3 funds that invigorate innovation throughout the state. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about funds, just because I think it's important that we have that ability to have some focus for the state. And so the first thing is if a business partner comes or a department comes to us and they don't know they know they have an issue, but they don't know how to solve it, there is a digital innovation fund. And so they would work with the Office of Data and Innovation to work through and actually look at how they could solve that problem. And then if they have an existing system that is maybe several years old and they're either looking to modernize because the technology is requiring them to look at innovative ways to applying new modules, or in some cases it's legacy, we look at stabilization. And so from a stabilization fund perspective, what we do is we go in and assess, we look for quick wins, opportunity to really stabilize a system that in some cases is actually meeting the business needs. But what we found through the pandemic, that sometimes there is new demands on that technology that it was never designed to be successful at. And so stabilization allows us to go in and even prepare a system to be ready for innovation. And then we have a technology modernization fund. The federal government has, and several states also utilize a modernization fund. But what's unique about ours is we look for opportunities to do wins, short, quick wins that could be done within 12 months, low risk, but high value for the state. But beyond innovation, as we were just talking about, is organizational change. And so bringing basically stakeholders to the table. There's 3 tips that I have for the audience is really stakeholders need to be at the table, not just at business requirements, not just during the user acceptance testing. They need to have a seat at the table. If someone's going to basically remodel my home, I want to be a part of that journey. So I think it's pretty important that they get to be a part of prototyping and looking at the design of the screens and talking through the workflows. And so it's important that they have a seat, they have a voice. And then the other piece is walk a mile in your customer's shoes. I found that when I went out and saw how someone was actually utilizing the technology, both at the project level and post the project, it opened my eyes. Teri, I think you've heard this story before, but I was in correctional healthcare and we had moved all these images onto the computer. And we were doing a great thing because we didn't have to have film running around an institution any longer. But when I went out to an institution and sat and watched a dentist utilize the new system, what I saw was that he was drilling on a patient's mouth and he was wiggling the mouse with his foot. Not probably the ideal thing to do when someone's working in your mouth as a dentist. And so we didn't disturb him, but afterwards we went and checked with him and said, Dennis Smith, why were you wiggling the mouse with your foot? And he said, technology did such a great job. They put all these great images on the computer, but there's a security policy that if you don't log in or use the system for every so many minutes, it locks up. And so I kept moving the mouse with my foot so I could still see the image on the screen. Probably would not have known that if I hadn't gone out of headquarters and walked a mile in the customer's shoes. So I think it's just very important that we don't lose sight. There is a human being, there is a business process, there's people on the other side of the technology. And then my last tip for everyone on this particular one is we hear about fail fast. I don't necessarily like that motto. I believe learn fast. It's about how do you have iterative wins? And when you have the stakeholders at the table, you can make incremental pivots to make sure that you're all heading in the right direction versus engineers have a tendency to go off. We like to build, we know how the technology is going to be able to utilize all its functionality, and then we give it back to the business that, aren't you really happy with this gift that I gave you? And if you don't really think about organizational change, the gift that you think they're receiving, they may not see it exactly the way you see it. So learn fast.
Liana, I love those 3 points. I'm going to remember those, if you don't mind, and recite them because I think they're pivotal to any project that I've seen out there. And by the way, I love your example about wiggling the mouse. That is fantastic. Well, David, you really see any number of organizations that are struggling with some of the same things. So, looking at what I know you've done in California, but looking at a more broader base, what kinds of approaches are you seeing leaders take to, again, bring in the stakeholders, increase stakeholder adoption, but through that also help with the vendor management side, which is another key challenge in technology projects. So what are some of the things you're seeing out there?
Yeah, great to be here with both of you. What we're seeing, and we look at it initially through the lens of the executive sponsor, and the executive sponsor being the leader who has ultimate accountability in the end for that change. And oftentimes they're on the business or the program side. So what we're seeing, first of all, is change across private and public sector is happening more now than ever before. Everything is being digitized. And where we're seeing really successful projects is when the executive sponsor is able to create alignment up front, okay, across the vendors, the stakeholders, and bring in a very strong project leader, which we can talk more about later. It's really about prudent planning up front and getting the alignment. My understanding at Pixar, for example, is they spend a huge amount of time getting those storylines all in sync and everyone on the same page. Sometimes they'll spend a couple of years doing it at Pixar, because once they go to production as a movie, every day is so much more expensive when you're in production and so many more opportunities for there to be issues. So if you can double down on the alignment up front, then once you go execute these projects, they happen a lot faster and with fewer moving pieces.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, let me pick up on that, because I want to kind of bring together that executive sponsor with, Liana, the things that you were talking about in terms of stakeholder engagement. You know, we talk a lot about the term organization change management, and it's kind of a combination of the two things you both talked about, but it's also around sometimes, as you know, Liana, getting an organization to actually understand their processes and potentially change them. So how important is that as you look at your portfolio of projects? And how do you work with your executive sponsors and really even senior agency and department management to talk to them about, maybe we shouldn't get started with the technology until we've actually thought about how we want to run the business?
Well, Teri, you're going to get a lot of my Liana-isms, but optimize a process before you automate a process. That's one of my big things. Technology sometimes can, if you take a bad process, you automate it, you end up not with necessarily a great solution on the end. And so organizational change management, what is it saying? There's only one thing constant, is change. And when we look at technology, because every iteration of technology is building off another, it's accelerated level of change. And so what I find is the people and the process side is the most rewarding. It's the most challenging. Like I was saying, you're changing someone's home, how someone's been doing something for a very long time. And when we think of ADKAR and change management, it's like you're aware of it, you know, you have the desire to change, but sometimes it's like, are we ready as an organization and capable of change? And as David was saying, the executive sponsorship, both on the technology and the business side, is so, so important. And then ProSci, obviously a big change management capability organization. They say if you have good change management and you're working with middle managers and you're really focusing on that part as much as you are the technology, you're 6 times more likely to have a successful project. So when we're looking at these statistics, about 70% of all projects, not just IT projects, but projects in general, fail. Change is so critical. And we talk about scope, schedule, cost. ProSci also says 71% of projects stay on schedule if you remember, learn fast, that you are having them sit at the table. What 81% will stay on budget. In government, that's pretty important. So I would just say, and I said it before, have them at the table. When I joined my prior department, they had 3 chief information officers in the span of 5 years. They had spent 10 years working on a very large system where they took 49 disparate systems and put it into one. Big modernization effort. But there was a little bit of post-traumatic stress syndrome where you've been focusing on the business and technology side so long in project mode that it was difficult to figure out, how do we get past project and what does this organization look like? And so when I stood up and said, we want to do a strategic plan, instead of IT going off and doing, we wanted to be a trusted advisor, we wanted to have a growth mindset, we wanted to have quality. When we were looking at that, I wanted the business leaders to sit across the table from us and be a part of it. And so I brought all the middle managers and we sat there across one side of the table, and we brought all the investment, financial, health, all the leaders across the organization. And we said, what does innovation mean to you? What does modernization, where do you want? Because we feel sometimes we know what's best because we know what's coming around the corner when it comes to these great, great technology tools, but it has to be at the pace that business can adopt and be successful.
And it was amazing, Liana, what you did and the opportunity to work with you on that project. A couple of things I want to point out there is at that stage where it was really about driving the organizational change, what Liana did was very thoughtful in terms of who the right leader at that stage would be to project lead it. Who could lead a cross-functional team, how to set up that cross-functional team, and how to get the stakeholders bought in. What I would say, and Liana came in later on, it had already gone from project to program. It was now at rollout. I think one of the big things we've seen with dozens of clients, private and public sector, over the years is to take a lot of what Liana did at that stage and now move it upstream. So what we call upstream change management is right at the beginning of a project. Get the stakeholders involved, choose the right project director based on that team. And what I would say some specifics are is someone that people like to follow. Especially with a lot of remote work now, someone who's good at influencing from a distance. And then on the vendor front, Teri, to your earlier point, how does the vendor become part of the extended team? Because we've seen system integrators be extremely successful when all of a sudden it almost feels like they're integrated with the team and everyone is connected and going in the same direction. But upstream, it is so much less expensive if you get the executive sponsor aligned with everyone up front rather than having to do it on the back end. Anything you would add to that, Liana?
Well, I would just say what I found, especially since I was coming post, I've ran billion-dollar projects, portfolios, but what I found is the vendor, like you were saying, is so, so important because the vendor's not going to solve all of our problems for us. We kind of think because they're amazing, they come in, they got all the experience, but we have to be a part of the journey as well. And so how do you transition? And vendors will say, I'm here to come in and do X, but you have to own this. It's not just the project. You have to realize what is that going to do post-project. So how do you start weaning yourself off? And so one of the things we did successfully was sit down with the vendor and they started being in the back seat and focusing on the knowledge transfer that was required, that we were, it was basically state staff were taking it over and the vendor was there in order to assist them to be successful versus feeling like we were completely reliant. So again, change is about the business side, but also at some point, how does the company, how does the state continue to own that that program and move it forward? So I think it's just important. Everyone has a role, but we have different roles throughout the entire life cycle. And just recognizing that you're taking one hat off and you're putting another hat on and be okay with that. And, David, you were just amazing when we were trying to go through that whole process and transition, right? So knowing the strengths of the team, I will tell you, I've got a very flexible operating style. But one of the things I learned quickly from David is as we start to be in this operating mode and we need to make a decision, I need to signpost more. So that's a part of change as well. How do you make sure that with your team that they know you're going from A to B and why you're doing that? And again, bring them along. Because if not, resistance is around the corner.
It is. And, one of the things around change, to your point, Liana, is change involves the executive sponsor and the project leader. Okay. Those two, that dynamic duo, to be growing and learning along the way as well. And one of the questions we get all the time is, this is the first time I've done a project of this size, or I'm running into a challenge that I've not seen before. And what I would say is, speaking to other leaders who've been through that challenge, even in different industry, and we're starting to connect a lot of private sector executive sponsors with public sector and nonprofit. And we're finding there's a lot of transferable best practice. So there's a lot of ways that you can learn while doing the role. And so change, you really want to bring growth-minded leaders in, like a Teri and a Liana. Both I've seen this, they learn along the way. Growth mindset, critical in the executive sponsor and the project leader.
Well, let me ask you to unpack a little bit. First of all, I want to emphasize a point that both of you made, and that is around the importance of ownership of the project and understanding that in order to make it happen, and Liana, you made this point so very well, that your vendor partner is your vendor partner. And certainly they have a key and pivotal role to play, but they don't own the responsibility to government. They don't own the responsibility to the citizen. I mean, in the end, in government, the custodians of that, of the dollars being spent on that project. And so I just wanted to emphasize that point that both of you made, because I think for the audience very often, it can get a little confusing in terms of what is the role of that vendor. But I want to ask you both to give me a little more about the characteristics that you see both in yourself or in leaders that you talk with that actually are there that seem to be important as they are able to, number one, take charge, take responsibility, have that ability to, if you will, be empathetic. But then the point that David makes, which is being able to pivot and being able to work your way through change. So, David, I'm going to start with you. Any particular characteristics that you've seen in leaders that are able to be successful and be able to thrive through change? And then I'm going to ask Liana that same question.
Well, I think whether they're the project leader, the executive sponsor, even the leader at the vendor, any of those, what I would say is being able to create a relationship with multiple constituencies such that they will proactively come to that leader with blind spots along the way. Blind spots are ultimately the biggest risk. No matter how good you are, you can't see a blind spot by definition. So if you can have the relationships up front, you can turn some of your biggest critics into your advocates. And so I think really developing those relationships up front so they proactively will come with you is key. And I just think number two, on that owner mindset, at the end of the day is really, it's about personal responsibility, and it's not about outsourcing the risk. Okay, it's about assuming that yourself. And I think that personal responsibility, as well as the relationship formed with your constituencies, with growth mindset, you have very high odds of success.
Liana, I'm going to turn to you because certainly in conversations we've had, those points that David's making are also about, and you've said this very often, about building trust. So can you talk a bit, kind of add to what David's saying about characteristics, but also why it's a big part of building trust and why trust is so important.
Well, thank you, Teri. And just to elaborate off of what David was saying is when we think about leadership is at all levels. We can see leaders at clerical level. We can see leaders at middle managers. It's not a title. It is actually the right to lead. And there's a lot of people that step up. And in order for a project to be successful, we have to find leaders across the organization. And we joked the other day about the circle of trust. There's several movies out there that talk about circle of trust. I won't go into, but it's important to realize that you have to put other people's needs before yourself, and you have to listen. So I think of it, my formula, Teri, is communication, collaboration, and connection, 3 C's. Connection means you're sitting back and you're actively listening to what problem are they truly solving. And again, getting out and watching someone say, I am having trouble with X, and then show me what that problem is. I've sat in a help desk center. I've sat watching people give benefits to members. Actually hearing what they're saying and then seeing what they're doing helps me connect and allows me to make sure that whatever I'm recommending and advising is something that is for the benefit of them. Technology can do amazing, amazing things, but it is all about them. and also connecting with your peers. There was an opportunity where there was an article where they're going to highlight, next generation government, and they wanted me to be on a front page in an article. The first thing I did, and I think, is I went over to my peer in the business side and I said, let's do this together. That's connection, that's trust, that's where our successes and our failures rely on one another. Communication, communication, communication. I think sometimes we take that for granted. It's one of those challenges that we all say we need to do more of it. But sometimes, we don't necessarily always make it a priority. So what is it we're communicating? Are we communicating the why? How can people be involved? Making sure that they know what's going on. Because these changes they can be incremental wins, but a lot of times you're moving a ship. And so one part of the organization doesn't know the other, and it's very easy to build silos. And so collaboration, bringing people together, vendor partners, technologists, business leaders, and having them collaborate on the overall solution. I just, that is a part of the trust. It's not just a word, it's something that you have to deliver through action. And you have to keep earning their trust. It's not just a one-time given. You have to continue to put yourself out there and be somewhat vulnerable, but also know at the end of the day, what you're doing is for them, not for yourself.
David, anything to add to that?
Again, the leadership at all levels is completely spot on. And I think that one of the great opportunities that executive sponsors have when working on these projects is to really observe talent maybe that are a few levels down, even from the project manager, and how they rise to the occasion. Because it's great for succession. It's great for figuring out who's going to lead your next project. So there's a lot of byproduct we find effectively from a project, other things you get out of it. And I think sourcing great talent's a big one.
Dave, that's a perfect point for my closing question. If we think about it, and Liana, I'm going to come back to you on this. You have had, a fantastic career. You've been a project manager, a project director, you now are in this amazing role of being the CIO. So any thoughts that you would have or advice that you'd have for those that are in our listening audience today that are maybe at one of those stages? And what are some of the things that they can think about and they can actually observe and learn as they look to grow into some of these bigger and more impactful roles?
Well, I would say when I was 18, when I started with the state in a tape room, we're not going to take about that, but we talk about upskill, and we always tell leaders upskill your resources, but it's also just as much our responsibility, no matter where we are in an organization. One is, have you let your leadership know where you want to go and what you need to be successful? We're just as important a part of that equation as expecting leaders to provide the availability of the tools, and not only look at what we need to do the job today, but what is it that we can do and evolve tomorrow. So definitely looking both sides, leadership and up and coming leaders need to look at upskilling and their responsibility in that, looking for opportunities to leverage those skills. I mean, I don't know if you've ever, I go to a training, I get all this great information, I jot down all these notes and it's wonderful. And then several days later, a month later, it's like, what am I remembering? If you don't take that and find small opportunities to leverage it, it's important. What is it, the word of the month or word of the day? Someone's always looking for an opportunity to leverage and insert that word. We need to do that for an opportunity for people to grow as individuals. I will tell you, when people step back, I step forward. I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but it allowed me to take on challenging projects, challenging issues in an organization that allowed me to shine and grow. So definitely make sure you're looking for opportunities. And then last, look for mentors. Teri, you've been a mentor of mine, and, David, obviously there's ties that, you are on a train and you're mentoring me as well. there's people in your life that make a difference, and there's things that you're going to learn from everyone. It doesn't matter if they're colleagues, it doesn't matter, even in some cases I learn more from someone I'm mentoring than I do sometimes with
Absolutely.
reaching out to someone that is running a CEO of a company. So just look for all those opportunities, because life is a journey, and look for that growth, even if it's not a career, because it's not, our careers aren't rungs on a ladder, our careers are a winding road. And so there's things that I was just like, oh my goodness, this is very challenging. And then I look back now and go, you know what? That was the best thing that I could have ever gone through, because I am so much better for what I had to go through and what I was able to deliver. So again, upskill, opportunity, and mentorship would be something that I would recommend.
Well, David, I'm going to give you the last word here. What advice do you have?
Yeah. I'm gonna leave with one concept that we can pick up maybe on a follow-up session, and that is what we call comparative advantage. The biggest theme we're focused at working with executive sponsors at Hyper these days is helping them understand their comparative advantage in their teams. And what comparative advantage is what are you best at that takes the least amount of effort? Okay, really understanding what somebody is uniquely suited for, so you can figure out what role they are in and what you are really, so you're really building on your strengths. And I will just say, it's been a pleasure over the years, Teri, your comparative advantage, really strong on intuition and pattern recognition. And Liana, how you connect as a trusted advisor to other leaders, and how you dot connect. About the dot connecting. These are comparative. They're things that might come easier to us. And so if we can really look in the mirror, get some feedback from others as well, and know what it is we can uniquely contribute, that doesn't take as much effort. We can really build on our strengths.
Outstanding. Well, I want to be respectful. Liana, David, thank you so much. I have really loved this conversation. And I also want to thank David Hyper Solutions for making today's presentation possible. And thank you to our audience for spending time with us. We look forward to seeing you again at another government technology event. Have a great day, everybody. See you soon.